Next, we have 10B1 AR 2024-87, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly urging our congressional delegation to support negotiations which lead to an immediate bilateral ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Mr. Chair, point of information.
Go ahead.
Did we inquire if the folks happen to be here for 10 Alpha 2 because we were going to take this up at the end of the consent agenda?
Right. Are the folks here for the Women's History Month? No. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and proceed. Mr. Presverdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I pulled this item because I think it was important that we have the discussion tonight, but I would request that the Chair allow me to cede my time to one of the three sponsors of this bill to make the motion.
That's fine.
Chair, I'd like to move to approve the S version.
Second.
So a motion by Ms. Bronga to move the S version. Who was the second? Mr. Volland. Go ahead. All right, Ms. Bronga.
Thank you. I know I'm looking at signs saying no S version, and I want to tell you that I feel like this is the path forward for a ceasefire. I have spent enormous amounts of time talking with people from Anchorage for Palestine and different people emailing me in the medical community, and this has to stop. And the way forward is not going to be the way that makes a lot of people happy, but what I'm finding in my very new role of city government is that sometimes you have to compromise, and I have been very proud to have conversations with Anchorage for Palestine, and Mr. Martinez and I started this with a resolution that I may be very simple, but I thought it would be passed unanimously. We may be even wearing some sort of badge of honor for just bringing the community together, not saying hateful things on either side. But what the reality is if we want to actually send our Washington delegation a message of ceasefire, let aid into the region, we realize that we have to move the S. And I spoke with Mr. King earlier about this, and I know he's disappointed, but my opportunity to talk with people in the Palestinian community that live in Alaska, and my time speaking with people in the Jewish community, I feel really strongly that what needs to happen is something that possibly Mr. Perez-Verdia could help us with, some listening sessions where we get to know each other better and figure out where we're coming from, because I think right now we have just a genuine lack of seeing each other for who we are. So our S version came from conversations with the Jewish community, and they would like to see nothing pass because they worry about inflammatory speech and problems in the synagogue, and I know those same sorts of things the Palestinian community worries about. But so we put language in there that would make sure that it was known that the U.S. recognizes Hamas as a terrorist organization. We put in words that talked about how Palestinians have a right to be safe in the Gaza Strip, but Israel also has the right to defend themselves from attack. At this point, ceasefire needs to happen, and so that's what the S version is about. It's about threading a needle, trying to get somewhere where we can make that statement of ceasefire, because it has to stop.
Next, I think you have Mr. Volland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think everyone in this room, I hope everyone in this room wants to see lasting peace and an end to this conflict. And some of the testimony that I found the most compelling was from healthcare providers, and with the on the difficulty that it is to get aid to people who need it. In fact, there's a woman here in the I think the third row back who I believe you're a nurse and you testified before us, and I really appreciated your testimony. I will say I'm a little bit disappointed to see all the signs in the room saying no S version. My guess is that Member Braga probably worked very hard on a compromised version. I think we do have to be able to put this current conflict in context. What I would like to do at this point is actually to move Volin-Zolotel Amendment number 1 to the S version.
There is a motion to amend by Mr. Volland, seconded by Ms. Zolotel. Mr. Volland.
Thank you. So what this attempts to do is to blend some of the language that I was going to bring forward as an amendment to the original version and some of the language from the S version put forward by the co-sponsors. I want to highlight a couple things. Number one, it amends the title to call not just for an immediate bilateral ceasefire, but to lasting peace, because I believe that is the true end goal here. Although we do need a ceasefire and we do need delivery of aid and health care and food to the region. Also, it includes a whereas that I think is important, acknowledging that both Jewish and Palestinian peoples can trace their histories of their ancient ancestors back to the region that is now Israel, and both groups have been subjected to historical oppression and colonization. In particular, I want to keep the reference here to an Assembly resolution that we passed, 2023-137, the S2 version, which was a resolution that was worked on very hard, went through multiple iterations, and that was by interim member Robin Dern when she served to represent Eagle River. And it condemned the threat or use of political violence and denounced extremism in all its forms. And while I know this may be controversial, I think it's important to recognize that Israel is a full member state of the United Nations. And Hamas is acknowledged by the U.S. State Department as a foreign terrorist organization. So, to me, I want to see an end to this conflict. I want to see civilians get the help that they need, particularly children. When I had previously supported a motion to postpone and call a question, when this was last brought up, I do want to acknowledge one thing. I've received some criticism because I brought forward an item on the Russia and Ukraine conflict. I see a little bit of contrast between that item and this item, I will acknowledge. The main thing being is that in that item, there was something that local government could effectuate. We had a sister city relationship with Ukraine that we were able to suspend, so that was the first action we were able to take within our scope. The second was, at that time, we were flying the Russian flag from municipal property. And so, in this instance, we don't have a sister city relationship with Israel or any form of Palestinian government. We aren't flying the Israeli flag or the Palestinian flag from municipal property. So, all that to say, I don't know if this actually effectuates anything, but I realize that to many this will be powerfully symbolic. And so with that, I encourage support for the amendment to the S version. Thank you.
So I have a queue right now that is long, but I think it's on the main motion. So I'll give folks the option. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to speak on the main motion, but I'll go ahead and speak to the amendment, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on this amendment, I will be voting no, and I'll be voting no for a few reasons. First is that this amendment adds, I think, as one of the sponsors stated, a lot of context. And I know that sometimes we as a body like to add a lot of whereas statements, like to add a lot of context, but I would argue that this is one of those issues that maybe saying a little bit less is actually better. And in my opinion, the S version says the things that community members wanted us to say. This amendment, I think, goes just a step too far for me, so I will not be supporting the amendment. In addition, there's one exclusion from the amendment that I don't understand, and will, if this amendment does pass, I'll be seeking to make a floor amendment to find a way to add it back in, but in particular, the removal in Section 3 of the right of Palestinians to a place to call home, free of Hamas, is something that for me should be relatively uncontroversial. So hopefully this will be something, hopefully the amendment doesn't pass, but if it does, I will be seeking to make a floor amendment to add that back in. Thanks.
Next in the queue on the main motion, but you can have the floor now if you want. Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to the amendment. First of all, I'm proud to stand behind the words of the original version. I think the starting point for us was trying to stay in our lane with respect to effectuating a call to our federal delegation and recognizing that the level of community information around this issue is not extremely high, but that there are extremely deep emotions running in our community. I thought it was best that we try to not have as much of the background information and really stick to the humanitarian question at hand. I think the compromise that Member Bronco mentioned with respect to the process should be a little further understood. I first engaged this process, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but when there was a call for a question, how should folks engage in local government and how should they get involved in these processes? So I'm not supportive of this particular amendment primarily because the starting point for me is a little more neutral in that the value of our community to speak to our community issues through this resolution, I think, is important. But I'm fine with moving to a space where we have incorporated more language that we heard Member Bronco did a lot of work on to have an S version. And so I'm never here to be the champion of perfection of local government, and I've said that before. Part of the process is to compromise, to be able to disagree with dignity and still find a way forward. I hope we can find that way forward this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Next in the queue, Ms. Alatil.
Thank you. As one of the sponsors of the amendment, I would agree to restore the statement in Section 3 if my co-sponsor would as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a section swap and should not have been deleted.
Certainly work with the clerk for just a sec.
And in fact, can I finesse that a little bit, Mr. Chair? Because I think we're going to have duplicate language.
I think you have to ask Ms. Alatil because she has the floor.
Yeah, so I think...
The floor back?
I'm not ceding the floor, no.
Right, so maybe
Sorry.
just hold on just a
Yeah, you
minute.
can show. Sorry.
So it should go, it should go after this.
Oh, okay. So we would like to restore the sentence that was deleted in Section 3 and actually place it right as the second sentence in Section 4.
I review that on the board.
Looks correct to me.
Okay, so the sponsors agree that that is the current amendment. The current amendment, Ms. Zalatel, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I agreed to co-sponsor this amendment, but I think this is a very complex situation, quite frankly, and I don't feel equipped to weigh in on foreign policy. I will tell you, I spend my time as an assembly member looking at state and local issues. I try to become an expert on things like the port, the Klutna River restoration, the budget. I take great pride in understanding a lot of the complexities of our local government, and that consumes, I must admit, most of my time. Plus I try to, pay attention to my family once in a while. And I really appreciated Member Martinez's statement about staying in our lane. I feel like all of this is taking us out of our lane. It is taking us out of our lane. I'm worried about unintended consequences because certain community members are coming forward wanting to hear one set of narrative. Other community members are coming forward with wanting to hear another set of narratives. Other community members are saying stay out of it. Other community members are somewhere in between. I think this amendment tries to strike the balance of somewhere in between. It's making, I think, the best out of a bad situation. I want to highlight, and I think it's really important that it's in the amendment, that we did pass the resolution condemning political violence of all types. That resolution remains in effect. And I feel like today we are possibly on a slippery slope, that we should maybe take up a resolution in response to every humanitarian, climate, and political crisis in our world, if all we're going to do is be urging the delegation to do something about it. Because the federal delegation is in the best position to do things about this, and we're not. In the end, I agree the situation is untenable, should end as soon as possible. I'm generally come from a very pacifist position that war is never the answer. But man, I feel like I'm in over my head. I feel like there's a lot of responsibility when you bring this kind of item and you create expectations and you put, no, not you. The membership gets put in a position, I think, this is my opinion, I feel put in a position that I shouldn't have to weigh in on this, that I don't feel like this is appropriate. So I support the amendment. I do not know what I will do on the main motion, even if the amendment passes, quite frankly, because I feel really uncomfortable to be in this position. And I can't stress that enough, because if I want to weigh in on this, I would want to be fully educated on it. And yes, I read the paper, but it's so much more than beyond the headlines, and it depends what news source you read. And I want to go back to thinking about the port and Klutna and the things that I know we can effectuate here and now that are really important to our community. It doesn't discount the importance of this, but it stresses the role we play in our community, the role we play in our community and what we are elected to do. Thank you.
I'm Palestinian. I'm a senior.
Please, you're being, thank you.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
You're all out of order, and we'll have to clear the chambers again, and that is not the point of these meetings, so please come to order. Ms. Brawley.
Thank you. And I would like to speak on the main motion as well, but I'll speak to the amendment now. First, I want to thank Member Zalatel, because a lot of what you shared, I am feeling also. Again, not because it's lack of caring or humanitarian feeling. The reality is this is a hard job, and I'm not saying that because I'm asking for sympathy. This is what I told Daniel King as well when we met this weekend. It is just the reality that there is not enough hours in the day to do the work of this municipality, especially the state we're in. And so we are constantly triaging. We are constantly making choices and trying to do the best that we can make material positive impact in this city. So what I will say on this amendment, I also don't feel qualified to weigh in on this. It is not because it isn't important, but I just want to put out there at this point in the debate that I am frustrated that all of the dialogue so far around this issue has basically conflated two real but really distinct questions. The one is the huge question: what should happen in Gaza? Meaning, what action should the Israeli government take, Hamas, other governments in the region, the United States? Those are real questions, and there is a real serious harm being done to human beings in that region, which does ripple out, right? None of us want violence. None of us want to see people killed, I would assume. At least I feel that way. That is one giant issue. The distinct issue that is related but is separate from that issue is what should we, the Anchorage Assembly, on behalf of this community, do about it or say about it on the record. And I believe that it is really important to think about those things distinctly, not because the second one invalidates the first one, but I think the question is really, what is the goal? And this is what I posed to Mr. King and what I would pose to everyone in this room. What is your goal? If the goal is simply to pass this resolution so that the Anchorage Assembly votes yes and asks the congressional delegation to do something, that is a very, very narrowly defined organizing goal. So what I offered to Mr. King and that I would offer to everybody is to think about what your actual goal is, and is this the only way to achieve that goal? And is the language, knowing that things go through an amendment process, knowing that we don't know the outcome. It sounds like we don't know the outcome right now. This is going to happen in real time. So if your only goal is to have this resolution passed in the form that it was written, then that goal is so narrow that it is hard to get a win out of that. It is hard to get out of that and say that this is something that we feel good about at the end. So I would say, and we'll continue the debate understandably, I don't know how I want to vote on these amendments. I don't know how I want to vote on this resolution, but I would encourage thinking about what is the actual goal and what gets us further as a community, that we can not only de-escalate end the conflict in other regions of the world, but also de-escalate the conflict that's happening here that is of a different kind, but has really erupted in the last several weeks and certainly in the last week. And I'll save the rest of my comments for later. Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Presverdia, do you want to stay in for the main motion only?
Yes, the main motion.
All right, thank you. Mr. Terrell on the amendment.
Specifically speak to the amendment or to the main motion?
On the amendment right now.
I will cede my spot.
Thank you. So, Mr. Cross, on the amendment or the main motion?
I'll wait for the main motion. Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Martinez. All right, so is there no one else who wishes to speak on the amendment? Hearing and seeing none, members may proceed to vote on the amendment.
Member Presverdia?
No.
On a vote of 7-5, the amendment has passed. Now, Mr. Martinez.
Mr. Chair, excuse me.
Mr. Terrell.
No.
I'm sorry.
On the amendment.
Thank you. I'm sorry. 7-5 and the youth member votes no. So next we'll have Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. The questions that were raised a few minutes ago with respect to why this body should take this issue was the first question that I had for anyone who spoke to me. It didn't matter what background you were. It didn't matter what part of the community you were. If you wanted to speak to me on this issue, I held fast to the question of why. This is independent and devoid of one's personal issues. This is the role of the Assembly. And initially, I took the time to meet with varying folks and to listen, to develop a rubric for myself to determine why and how this body acts at all. I recognize that people come from every issue and toward every issue from different perspectives and different vantage points, especially when they're emotionally charged. This item is particularly no exception. You see, I grew up in New York City, where the tension around the historic questions and the political complexities involved in this issue are visible, loud, and intractable. But I'm here to be responsive to the opportunity for a public process in this community, the Anchorage way. It is my hope that we can speak to an Anchorage way, which which highlights for me a legacy of hope and understanding and cooperation with an actual municipal record of public engagement on world events when those world events impact members of our community. I also recognize that although there may be an ethical response, that we do have a limited lane. I don't believe that we should be wading indiscriminately into world events, but I do recognize that I've heard from many, many constituents from all sides of this particular question. And I've probably heard from more constituents on this matter than some of the more practical, tactical, municipal items that are even on our agenda this evening. That raises the question of how important is this issue for us to take a step forward toward. And I don't have an outcome predetermined, except that we can have a space for our community to find each other, to listen, to have the ability to find a bridge-building spirit, to have this body be responsive to that bridge-building spirit. And it's not going to be perfect to all the edges, believe me. But if we can have that lane into this bridge-building spirit, then I believe we can articulate the values of this community. And we are a peace-loving community, as it's been highlighted before. I also recognize that no side speaks for all sides. And I'm very challenged when I hear folks say I've met with this community or that community. I meet with individuals that have different perspectives, even across the same communities, even when they're in the same congregation. But I do believe that we crafted an original resolution that speaks to the values of our community, independent of taking hard sides. We've passed just now an amendment. I will not delay the call for a ceasefire because of my ego or perspective around any amendment, and I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. That's the beautiful thing about our democratic process. We all have different opinions of what is important, why it's important, and how we should approach this. But again, the starting point for me was there were a lot of people in our community said, how can we get involved? What is the process? And I hope that during the process of all of this, we've learned some political literacy. We've learned how to work together, and the value of disagreeing with dignity, still finding a way forward, and compliments to my colleagues who decided to hear this evening, because fundamentally I think we owe it to our community to be responsive, even if those things seem challenging and very complex. But I also want to put the pressure right on all the members of the community who I've spoke with, because I challenged them to do more in the spaces outside of this action and outside of the body. No matter what happens on this particular item, it is my hope that the values of the Anchorage way, the finding each other way, the working together cooperatively, the teaching together, the educating together, that those things can happen. And on that note, I will close saying I had a great conversation with Daniel Clift, and I asked for permission for Daniel Clift to be able to shout out my conversation with him. Now, Danny is a leader at Beth Shalom, and Danny is a neighbor. He's a constituent. He's a father. And when we had this conversation, what I recognize is that Danny said to me, I know these things are complex, but he appreciated that there were some folks willing to take the time to listen, to find a higher level of a pathway. And on that conversation, we didn't necessarily walk away with agreement, but I knew that Danny said to me, he believed that we tried our best to follow a process that would be healthy for our community, knowing that the issues are very toxic and indeed very emotional. So I yield the time, Chair, and I thank you, and I hope folks can not let the egos get in the way of a unified call for a ceasefire in the region. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking of egos, I probably won't be voting for any resolution. How arrogant do I have to be to think that the people in Gaza or Israel care what an overweight white guy in Alaska has to say about their plight? Meanwhile, in the United States, 27 million people are in human trafficking and 2,400 children are abducted and raped every day. Our house is on fire, we're choking on our own smoke, and we're virtue signaling to the rest of the world what they should be doing. I'm just like, I don't have enough problems looking out in the street and seeing our homeless people freezing to death. Meanwhile, we're going to spend hours in hot breath. There has never been so many people that have ever showed up for anything. When we've got rapes and murders and issues within our own borders here, never see a crowd this big. And the media is failing us because it hasn't brought to light that our own house is on fire. When you go, regardless of what happens, take this energy, go out into your communities. Gosh, bless the world abundantly with humble acts of service to the people standing next to you, because there's pain in our own streets that's being ignored while we arrogantly tell people across the world what they should do. Thank you.
Yeah, in the United States. Please come to order. Please come to order. Mr. Presverdia, please come to order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
You have the floor.
Thank you. Well, first I want to just take a moment to thank the sponsors of this resolution for bringing it forward. As everyone here tonight, I think it's a difficult issue that we're all wrestling with. Like many of my colleagues, I've spent a great deal of time over the last 2 weeks talking to people on both sides of this issue and truly try to learn and understand to the degree I can. At the end of the day, I really believe that this is a call for peace. And I understand from many people in the Jewish community, right now a call for peace in this way is a call for violence. And that concerns me greatly. It concerns me the increased violence that we've seen in our state and across our country for Jewish people over the last few weeks and months. And this is certainly, from my perspective, not an incentive or a call for that at all. The opposite, it's a call for peace. So I encourage my colleagues to support this because at the end of the day, it's a call for peace. It's a call for stopping violence with the opportunity to negotiate in a nonviolent way. And as difficult as this decision has been for me, I want to encourage my colleagues to support it from that perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, I have Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to be brief, I think, in hopes that we try and keep this debate relatively short. Members stole a little bit of my thunder, and I was going to, at the front, admit and realize that this resolution is probably putting some folks in an awkward position, and readily admit that is sometimes part of the job. We all get put in awkward positions sometimes. Also want to acknowledge that there are members of the community who are very wary and fearful of this conversation and the ability of this conversation to do harm in the community. Never before in an issue have I heard so many voices urging some of us to stay silent, and so many voices urging some of us to speak up. That has been a very interesting part of this process. For my part, I come at this with the value of the sanctity of life. I personally feel like that value has been lost in a lot of this debate and a lot of this dialogue that's happening, not just in our chambers, but in dining rooms, at restaurants, all over the place. People are having this dialogue, which I think gets me to the local nexus. If there's anything I've learned is that there's a huge amount of community dialogue and interest on this issue from a variety of different perspectives. I actually ended up talking about this issue on Saturday in a forum that I frankly wasn't even prepared to talk about this issue. I went to a drag show on Saturday, and folks wanted to talk about the Israel-Hamas conflict, right? Everyone, I think, everywhere is talking about this issue. Speaking to folks in the room and others listening, I hope that you continue to engage and not lose faith in your ability to make change at the local level. I understand and I get that this process can sometimes feel disheartening, but I truly do hope that you continue to be involved. I'll just end with a a restatement that I come at this with the value of the sanctity of human life. And I hope that we can share that value with our congressional delegation, which I believe is an appropriate thing for us to do, and I urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Mr. Salt.
Thank you. A lot of good comments tonight. I will say I'm glad we're having this debate. I think that was a mistake we made last Tuesday. We owed this time, and I'm glad we're rectifying that. I think everyone on this dais is for peace, and everyone's for stopping any loss of life, foreign or domestic. As Member Zalatil said, this is a very complex issue. It's a world away. I personally feel incredibly inept and unequipped to even consider this issue because I know there's deep-rooted nuances here. I still stand by that this is not a municipal issue. This is not an issue for us to take on. And I'm also, I think personally just concerned with, I think if the roles were reversed and how the conflict is going, I don't think this would be before us. I don't see I stand with Israel signs. I don't see, I've seen some of the posts. I've seen some of the posts that were made around October 7th that were supportive, encouraging of the slaughter that took place at that time.
What about
Okay?
October 6th, October 5th?
Madam, please come to order.
Agreed.
You've been warned.
Agreed. It is a very difficult issue that, again, I'm not equipped to handle. Because I don't understand the nuances that have been going on in that part of the world. It's not on my radar on a daily basis.
Please come to order. This is not a discussion between the room and the dais.
So again, I'm glad
Security.
I'm glad we're having the debate, but I'm not sure, again, this is a municipal issue. Thank you.
Mr. Terrell.
Firstly, I would like to particularly shout out everyone in the crowd who has sit respectfully, brought the signs, used their body as their vote. This issue is a complex one, and you all are the reason for it being here today. This issue, the question of why does it matter has been brought up a lot. What can we do? I think this resolution is deeply symbolic and an issue that our community obviously feels very strongly about. And while it is a very complex issue, it is a very simple message, and that is to call for a ceasefire. I would like to mention, though, this energy is a good one. Bring it elsewhere, and thank you all for being here.
Next, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate Mr. Rivera's points about keeping the debate brief. When we voted on this last week, there were several amendments that were on the table. Looking at those at that time, I really did not have confidence that this would have a good outcome, regardless of what that outcome was, and that it would not resolve the conflict in our community, and that continues to be clear to me. But when it was brought back again, as was promised, it is clear now that the most practical way forward, as Mr. Salt says, is to really hash this out on the record as we're doing now. I'm still not confident that if this passes, it will have the impact that's intended, but I do have some hopes that I want to share with the room, things to think about. First is reflecting on effective organizing, defining your goal. When you define the goal as asking the Assembly to pass a resolution, it really forces all of the issue into a binary choice that your move is really to put pressure on us. So what I would encourage is thinking more broadly about the goal, and I am happy to continue talking about that. Elevating community voices, continuing dialogue. As others have said, there's other forums that this issue can be addressed and elevated and more people be engaged. But right now it is really forced into this binary choice with this resolution and whatever it ends up looking like as it's been amended. The other thing about organizing is really thinking about the long game and building the relationships. So I think what we've seen is probably a lot of us in the room have the same values. Because it's all been forced into this one issue, that isn't always clear. But really, the long game with organizing is building your allies, maintaining your allies, and that includes elected officials. So I would encourage thinking about that, and I would certainly like to continue that dialogue as an ally. And then lastly, Again, it's really focusing your energy and focusing other people's energy where they can have the most impact. And so again, we may have differences of opinion on that. I do firmly believe, and why I'm in this seat right now and everything I've done up to this point is because I believe that working on things locally has the most impact. And again, that is not to negate the importance of or the seriousness of what is happening across the world, but it is also a fact that we have limited spheres of influence, and the closer we are to an issue, the more impact we can have, direct material impact in this community. And so I will make this offer, the same one that I made to Mr. King in our meeting on Saturday. I would love to sit down with folks, and I'm sure other members would as well, to help you better understand the process so that you can utilize it to have your voice heard, not just on this issue, but on other issues. We have issues of homelessness and housing. We have issues coming up about camp abatement and the humane treatment of people sleeping outside. There will be a lot of issues, and there will continue to be in this community, that I believe are also worthy of having a debate and having engagement about what is the humanitarian thing to do. So I will leave it there, but as I said, I don't believe this is the end of the conversation, and it is unfortunate that it has been so narrowly defined into a yes or no, but there is a lot more that can be said and a lot of other work that we can do in the community. Thank you.
Next, I have Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it brief since most of this has already been said. I also support the goal of achieving a lasting peace in Palestine and Israel. And I also, like many of my colleagues up here, struggle with how to respond or how to vote on the resolution before us. I do feel confident, looking at, I think, a number of decent folks who have come out in support of this, that passing it would provide some measure of comfort. I don't dismiss that. But I also acknowledge the fact that it will carry with it some harms. This will stoke fear amongst the community who I think has already been targeted. And frankly, whatever course of action we have, I think we have to confront those trade-offs. There is some good that will come of this and some bad that will come of this, whichever path we take. And I think that's just the nature of the thing. But I would not pretend that there is a simple solution which doesn't carry trade-offs with it. I think for me, and this has been stated by some of the members already, it's important to recognize what our fundamental role is as the Anchorage Assembly, as the local legislative body. We elect leaders, the people of Alaska and Anchorage, to the federal government to represent us in foreign policy matters. That's their job, and I hope that you're also engaging with them because they're the ones who are in a position to affect change. But the work we do here at the local level, as members have pointed out, I think Member Zalatel spoke on it very eloquently, it is difficult and it is impactful. And it consumes a lot of our time and energy. And it is a place where we can and do need to make a difference. I worry when we start to create this expectation that we as an assembly, as a body, will take a position on matters of national or international significance, because frankly, our ability to have an effect beyond providing some measure of comfort is very limited. And I worry about what happens if we continue down that path, when we look at so many of these national issues and the partisanship that has brought all but complete gridlock to the federal government. And the more we bring that into our local government, the more I think it affects our ability to do the job that we were brought here to do. So I will say for my part, I'm not sure how to vote on this, but I will just say to my colleagues that we should be worried about creating this expectation that this is the role of the Assembly to weigh in, because when our local elections become referendums on national and international issues, it will come at a cost to our ability to do the job that Anchorage needs us to be focused on.
You're ceding the floor? I'm going to go with the queue as it is right now, Ms. Braga.
Thank you, Chair. I think almost everything has been said. I really appreciate Anna's thoughtful review of how we really need to take the time outside of this meeting and make sure that all of you still stay engaged in city government. This is amazing to have so many of you here, and that's why I took it on to start with, is that the stay in your lane thing is one thing, but I think my lane is to listen to my constituents. And my constituents were hurting, and we brought this forward. Admittedly, this is super complex. And all I can say with certainty is that a ceasefire needs to happen. But what I more want to say to all of you is the only reason that I am sitting up here is because nobody else wanted to run. And so it's a tough job, and I ran because I really believe that I could make a difference for the East Side, which I care more about than most anything else. The East Side is where I grew up and where I still live, where I taught, and I hope that I'm still hearing about issues that are coming up from all of you. I'm hoping I'm getting 200 emails about homeless camp abatement and all of these other issues. But more than that, I want you to really take away from this that you get educated on the issues, you run for office, you make sure, well, probably not that order, you get educated on the issues, you make sure you're registered to vote, you vote, that's your superpower, you vote. We have a mayoral election coming up, we have a presidential election, these are huge. And if you have a possibility that there's a friend that's not registered, that you're making sure that happens. And then lastly, run for office. We will support you in that, and it's really important that new, fresh ideas are coming forward, and from the emails I read from many of you, you are the new, fresh ideas. And this is really, I hope this doesn't make this issue sound like I'm simplifying it, but as a teacher, I could not resist the poem by Robert Fulghum that said, all we really needed to know about how to live and how to be, we learned in kindergarten. Wisdom was not learned at the top of the graduate school mountain, but there at the sandpile of recess. We learned to share, play fair, and don't hurt anybody. Put things back where you found them, clean up your mess, don't take things that aren't yours, and say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. And we have a long ways to go on that, but I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Ms. Zoloton.
Thank you. So I've listened to the debate, and I don't think this is the forum for this conversation. Those in this room want to have a conversation. They want to engage. And a resolution is not a point of engagement. That is a back and forth and a conversation and a dialogue with this body. It's just not how our rules work. It is very dissatisfying that it's not that way, but that's the reality of what it is. There are opportunities, and some members have done this before. You can hold a town hall, you can host community conversations, and all of those venues allow for the exchange of ideas back and forth beyond the 12 members up here. And honestly, I think that is what I am hearing is what is desired and what is requested. And that ultimately leads to a deeper understanding of the issues from multiple perspectives. Simply getting a piece of paper and some written amendments and working through all these documents doesn't do that. So beyond just being an issue I don't think we should weigh in on because we are not foreign policy experts, and we've already passed a resolution condemning political violence. And I don't think this is the forum. I will be voting no. Thank you.
I don't see anyone else in the queue. Members may proceed to vote.
Member Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
On a vote of 8-4 and the youth member votes
Yes.
yes, the resolution AR 2024-87 S1 as amended.
S is amended.
I'm sorry, let me say that again. On a vote of 8-4 and the youth member votes yes, AR 2024-87 S as amended has passed the body. That concludes our consent agenda, and we'll now take our regularly scheduled break.